Sure. I've been coming to these shares for, I think now nearly 3 years, and yeah, it kind of struck me sitting here now. Like, I remember when these meetings were held at the Blue Marlin, when I was first in the treatment center up the hill, and I remember sitting there and thinking, I would like to do that one day, but yeah, I don't know if that's going to happen. And it's been on my mind a lot the last couple of days, because in our sister fellowship yesterday, the daily reader was about kind of just having patience with, or understanding when an addict isn't kind of ready, and never give up hope, because you never know when that's going to change. And in a way, that's been my story. So a little bit about where it all started. I'm from Zimbabwe. I was born there. I was born into a very normal and loving home. But as long as I can remember, I was terrified of life. I have been crippled by fear, I think, for most of my life. And in every possible way, my actions have, in some shape or form, demonstrated that. I remember as a small kid, and it's interesting, I related to someone like Sal, who shared last week about being terrified, being dropped off at school. And I remember being dropped at school and crying, absolutely paralyzed with fear that I wasn't going to be collected. I had nothing to base that fear on. And that didn't just happen when I went to kind of big school. I remember going from the time I went to playgroup, to nursery school, just this irrational fear. That's what I was ruled by. And that kind of carried through with me. As I said, it's been with me for most of my life. You know, I at junior school, I guess that fear, I kind of learned certain coping habits, mechanisms, if you like, and became hell-bent on, if I was to be good enough to master that fear, then I had to achieve certain things. And I would look to schoolwork, academics. I discovered the sports that I was good at, and those were the things I'd focus on. But I remember at a young age being obsessive about it, being completely all-consumed by, when things like exams came up for me. Exams weren't just like normal level stress for me. They were like the weight of the world was on my shoulders, because my head always told me that in order to be good enough, in order to be enough, I had to achieve a certain place within the class. I had to get a certain mark. And the same went with athletics. I loved my athletics, but instead of enjoying it, it became something that if I didn't win, or if I didn't do what I thought I needed to do, I wasn't good enough. And like I said, that kind of thought process, I don't know where that came from. It didn't come from my home. It didn't come from my parents. It was just there. And like when I hear people talk about this disease and how it's a fear-based disease, a self-centered fear, for me that resonates more than anything else, because what would then happen for me over the rest of my life was always really rooted in fear, and me trying to find a way out of that fear. So yeah, school for me outwardly, I guess I did achieve what looked to be like a normal, successful school. You know, went through junior school, was a prefect, did what I needed to do, went to senior school, taking all of those crazy fears with me, and crazy attachments to people. That's something else that I remember coming up really early for me. Like jealously protecting my patch when it came to friends and friendships. If you were my friend, you were only my friend, and those friends weren't allowed to have any other people that would be remotely as close as I viewed us to be. That sort of obsession and jealousy, all of those other behaviors started coming up for me very early. And my senior school life, kind of got off to that same set of behaviors, trying to do my best academically, stressing myself out to the point of breaking point if I didn't feel I was meeting those standards. And then I guess I remember my first experience with substance. It was at the wake of my granddad, I think. I don't really remember how old I was. I think I must have been maybe 12 or 13. And like I've heard many people share, it was one of those where going around sort of finishing off drinks left around at the wake. And just, in addition to feeling really shit, there was also something else that went off in my head, which was, I don't feel scared anymore. And like, that's not normal. It wasn't just bulletproof. It was like, oh, this is how this feels like I've always wanted life to feel. Anyway, it kind of, I guess, it only really started escalating my use of alcohol when I was probably 15 or 16. And then I was like that person who went from naught to, it was go big or go home from the word go. There was never any kind of middle ground. But because I now know what I know, is that because that became my solution instantly, that the relief from feeling so a part of and so scared of life and so terrified by everything going on around me that was crippling the rest of the time vanished when I used a substance. It was gone. And that kind of relief was something worth chasing. And I did. Somehow I kind of, I mean, my poor parents, I think, they I don't know, they kind of looked at it and they were incredibly understanding. And my home became one where, like, it was open to me and my friends to come around, do what we wanted to do there. And it was still like a happy place, because consequences really hadn't started happening for me in a big way. I certainly had would pray in the car. I would have that kind of teenage shit come up for me. And yeah, there were fights that started happening with my family, I remember back then, because of my inability to just be kind of normal with alcohol. But really that wasn't ever going to be on the cards for me. But nonetheless, I finished school and I got into the university that I wanted to do, and got into studying what I wanted to study. But wow, yeah, university was a traumatic experience for, I think, my family primarily, and not me, but because the consequences that started happening for me and my using and my drinking was consequences that my families had to start bearing. Financially, I was atrocious, because I was the kind of person that would just spend all the money that I was, like, my monthly pocket money, on partying, on going out. It was because I was chasing that solution. That's not an excuse. There was just a complete lack of responsibility for me. But also what started really coming out for me at that stage, I think, was this real sense of entitlement. I deserved to have all of those things, because I was doing what I should be doing as far as I was concerned. I was passing well, I was at university, and I was having fun. I was away from home and I was living my best life, that kind of attitude. But it was, as I said, those consequences of my alcoholism weren't really for me to deal with at this point. It was something I would shunt on to my family to sort out. If I needed more money, well, that was just the way it is. It must come. And that selfishness, that real selfishness, my alcoholic selfishness, really, I think, took hold there, in the sense that I didn't think what that did to them. I didn't think about what stress that put on my family at all. It was my right, and it was expected. And it didn't matter how much help I was given. I was like that bottomless pit, I think. Whether it was money or love or attention, it was never enough. And that's something else I also kind of now, when I look back, start seeing as like evidence of how sick I was. No one could give me enough of what I thought I wanted and needed. I think it was also like at that time where something else that I had sort of sat with for a long time knowing was that I was gay, but I didn't really want to talk about it. I didn't want to own it. And again, I've only ever had the most incredible support and love from my family. But being terrified of who I really was, made me really good at keeping secrets. That was one part of my makeup that, like, I think has made it really difficult for me at times to get honest and like look at really what's going on, because I became an absolute master at wearing a mask. I could hide a lot, and I did, because I was hiding who I was. Not only was I hiding the kind of alcoholic that I was hiding who I fundamentally was. And, my experience of coming out, if you like, was my parents sitting me down and saying, look, we're tired of waiting, we know, and it's fine. But I needed that. I was too terrified to even do that. And I think I might have got this wrong in my head, but what I remember is having a conversation with my mum, and I think for her and my dad, I think they might have also thought that a lot of my unhappiness and a lot of the poor behavior and my drinking and just general shittiness was down to the fact that I was sitting on that. And don't get me wrong, it was a factor, but it wasn't it. I was an alcoholic. And I think in the back of my mind, I always kind of knew that too, because maybe at that stage in my life, I also sort of hoped on some level that if that was dealt with, that I could then be normal and I could use and drink normally. But it didn't. That wasn't what happened for me. Consequences then towards the end of university started to come quite thick and fast. I remember I was arrested for drunk driving. I'd run someone over, and once again I turned to my family. This was right before my final law exams, and my dad had to bail me out. He had to fly down to Grahamstown, and he had to sort out the mess I'd made. And whilst I was grateful for it on the surface, I was grateful for the fact that I wasn't in trouble anymore. I wasn't grateful for what they were actually going through and what that was doing to them. It was about turning to the people I expected to fix everything, because they were my parents. That's what they had to do. They had to fix this. That's the kind of person I'd started becoming. And it was at that point, I guess I was 21 or 22, that it was a big fright for me, that whole experience. But it wasn't enough of a fright, because the charges were dropped, because the cops lost the blood test. So I never actually had to face the charges for what I'd done. But what happened thereafter was, like, I stopped drinking for, I think, maybe a year and a half. And, amazing, I had no program, but amazingly, the removal of substance, my life started to sort of come back together. I started working in Mozambique, and, life was pretty good. But I had no idea about a program. I had no idea about the behavior side of it. I had no idea that really the substance was just a symptom for me. And it didn't take long before, my brain was still in a place where, like, alcohol really wasn't the problem, and I'd had enough of a break, and after a year and a half, I started drinking again. And, it was then in my 20s that I found what was to become really my other primary substance of choice, and I loved that stuff. And one of the big reasons I did was because it meant I could use that and drink as much as I liked, and I didn't fall over. It became my other absolute solution. I could then go to that place where I could be permanently in my solution, and no one would be any the wiser. Well, that's what I told myself anyway, which was mad. And my 20s certainly my late 20s are quite a blur. Things got really, they escalated very fast after I found that substance. I remember someone sharing to me, like, using that substance was like taking the blue train to the end of the road. It sped things up for me, and I guess I came to the first kind of crossroads in my life where I was hospitalized because of my substance abuse, and I then went into treatment for the first time. And it was here on the South Coast. It was just at another facility. And I turned 30 when I was in that treatment facility. I was there for a long time. I needed to be. I was down there for 9 months. And, it it's such a big part of my journey, because really that was the first time I got exposed to the 12 steps. It's not necessarily how I understand the 12 steps in the program now, but it was a seed, if you like. It started my understanding that there was a way out, even if I didn't fully understand how it would pan out for me. And so I went into treatment. And, it was, I don't really know. I'll never really understand or appreciate exactly what my family went through during that period. I know that they were extremely relieved when I came back out of treatment. And, what was to kind of happen for the next 7 odd years was me without substance. This is like a really weird kind of period in my life for me, because whilst I was going to meetings, and I did, I really fell in love with the program as I understood it. But what I never kind of got a grip on, which I know now, was just how alcohol and drugs weren't the problem. I was, and I didn't. Even if I was told that at the time, I don't think it kind of registered with me in a big way. I thought the 12 steps were about just keeping me off substances. My behavior didn't really change in a way that I know now that it has to, in the way that I know now things have to radically change, and that. And looking back now, I came out of treatment, and I think it was within the first year I got involved in a relationship. And it was a dishonest relationship, and the kind of extent to that will become clear as I share. But I met somebody who lived next door to me in the complex I lived, and he was 15 years older than me, and he was involved with someone at the time, but his partner was a pilot and was never there. And what happened over the course of the next 5 odd years was a relationship that I kept hidden from everybody. It was an affair, and I knew that, but it's like an important part of my story, because for me it speaks to like just how far from the solution I was. I was okay with that kind of level of dishonesty. I was okay with that kind of secret keeping. And whilst I wasn't using any substances, I was getting my fix off that relationship. And I don't blame Ian, I don't blame him. I take full responsibility for my choices and my actions. And like anything, I think, this next part of my chapter, there are a lot of people that I might mention, and I want to stress that it was never them. Anything that they said, did, or happened to me as a result was them reacting to the way I was. I was so incredibly sick and manipulative and deceitful and just without a solution. And I want to say, and I still sometimes do look back at that period as a very peaceful one, which sounds bizarre. But when your relationship, like mine was my solution, he was in a way my higher power, it was peaceful for as long as that relationship was there. And for me, I had I considered I had the best of both worlds. I had this person that I considered to be significant to me, but I didn't have any of the responsibilities of a relationship. I didn't have to practice anything like fidelity. I didn't have to worry about being attentive. I didn't have to worry about being anything like a loving partner, but he had to. There was a lot that I expected him to do for me, and that he did do for me. I mean, his side of things is his side of things, but I had great expectations on how I expected to be treated during this period. And all through those sort of 7 years, I was going to meetings. I was sponsoring people. I was rebuilding my relationship with my family, which it did happen. It's a very bizarre period in my life when I look back now, because, as I said, there was peace. There was to a degree a restoration of relations with my family. But when you're keeping a secret like I was keeping, it's all built on lies. My family knew nothing about Ian, nothing at all. The first time they found out about him was a little bit down the road when I fell on my face, and yeah, things went tits up. But before we get to there, my life was coming back together at that point. I had a good job, I had a home, I started to have money again, I started to have a great group of friends, people in the program, people who would later have to stand by me when I became very, very unlovable. But I had no solution. I had no real relationship with God. It was entirely missing. I think I paid lip service to it entirely, but I never felt it. I never felt it. My God was my relationship, and that was fine. Thank you very much. And it became a very that period in my life confused me for a long time, because I thought I knew how this program worked. I thought I knew how I could pick and choose elements of spiritual principles and working the steps that suited me and my life, thank you, because my life was okay. My life was back together. And what ended up happening was that the relationship came to an end with Ian, and it took about a year from that event to me having to go back into treatment for the second time. The first time I came to the house on the hill was after that. But this was a textbook case for me, and I look back at it now. When that relationship with Ian ended, my world unraveled, because my higher power was gone. Any form of solution that I had was gone, and I became completely obsessive over finding another relationship, in sort of building up defenses in terms of my appearance. I was obsessed with gym. I was obsessed with having the right friends. I was obsessed with presenting fine. I hadn't picked up yet, but I didn't realize just how mad I was becoming. And I've shared before, I became a really nasty person in that last year before I picked up. I was horrible, and I was horrible sober. And I had a group of friends who allowed that, and that again is not about them, it's about me. I wanted to be with those people because they suited what I wanted to present to the world, and they allowed me to behave in a way that is not okay. I would, my use and misuse of relationships and people during that period is still something that I'm really embarrassed by. I neglected my family. My friends and my busy life became my priority. Chasing another relationship became my priority. And chasing another relationship without actually ever getting over the other one, without ever actually processing what I'd done, without ever actually taking stock of the fact that I'd been in a really, really sick relationship, and I'd hurt somebody else, and I'd wedged myself into a marriage, if you like, where I didn't belong for 5 years, and I'd caused, untold kind of devastation to that relationship. That's my part. What Ian chose to do with me, that's his part, but I know what I had done, but I only know that now. And so the slide down took a year, and as I said, I was madly pursuing another relationship because that was going to be my solution, to staying sober. And I remember going to a wedding, and I was going to that wedding with this other chap who I had identified as he was going to be it. Life was going to be great. We would, he had no idea what he was in for. He didn't know the puppet master going on at the back there. And but I remember going to that wedding, and I had gone outside, and I was standing in one of those mobile toilets and I heard this other chap saying to somebody else that it wasn't going to happen. This relationship, but he wasn't into it. And like I said, this was now a culmination of all of my solutions falling down. And I remember walking out of that toilet and walking straight to somebody who I knew had a substance at that wedding, and I used. Because I was faced in that moment with the reality that all of what I considered my solutions to be were gone. It didn't matter how I looked, it didn't matter the friends I had, it didn't matter how much money I thought I had, it didn't matter how this beautiful life that I thought I'd created. If I didn't or couldn't get that solution, there was really only one other thing that would solve this, and that was drugs and alcohol. And that's what happened. And the relapse then lasted, I think, about 5-6 months before I came into treatment the first time to the house on the hill. But I wasn't ready at all. And I arrived in all of my glory there. I mean, I've got, Max always says she remembers me arriving and thinking there's this Zimbabwean Ken doll, perfect in my eyes, walking in. And really, I don't really have a problem. I know the steps, I know the program, and I'm here just to, I need some time. I need to, time away from my substance, time away from things, because that's really the problem. I've kind of skipped over a really important thing there. Before coming back into treatment that time, it took an intervention. And that was the first time that my parents became, or any of my family became aware of Ian. And I remember how devastated they were, because they were at the intervention in the first place, and I wouldn't talk to them. I wouldn't talk to anybody at that intervention, and just kept saying, unless Ian's here, I'm not listening to anyone. They didn't know who the fuck Ian was. They knew him, that he had been my neighbor, and I remember them sort of thinking, why do we need to wait for your neighbor to be here? This makes no sense. And then for them coming face to face with that secret, which I'd held for so many years. And I think I remember my mum saying to me how heartbreaking that was for them to know that something as important as that I had kept hidden from them for so many years. But that's the kind of person I'd become. I was so fundamentally dishonest that I still couldn't really understand why that upset them so much. This was my pain. This was what I was going through. I had been through all of this, and this had nothing to do with them. I went off to treatment with that attitude. I went into that treatment facility, as I said, thinking I knew better, and thinking that I knew enough, and this was a refresher course. And that I really I just couldn't hear anything then. I chose not to, but I just couldn't feel it. I didn't feel it, and it certainly was not a waste of time. And that I know now, because I knew when I was ready where to come. I knew where the solution was. But back then, I just wasn't done fighting. I wasn't done trying to do life on my terms. And that was what I've come to realize now. And the sponsor I had at the time said to me before I left, I was there for 3 months, and I remember before I left, he said to me that I could go out there, and he said, I'll tell you how it'll go for you. He said, if you try and pursue that faulty relationship again, you will pick up. I will pick up. And I knew at that point that is exactly what I was going to be doing. I was there to, as I say, get well and go back out there and get Ian back, which of course I never owned. There was no chance, because I was at a treatment facility and I kept hearing this idea that there was a year of no relationships. And that was not something that I was even remotely interested in pursuing, because the relationship was still my solution. Not what I was hearing, not what I was being told in that treatment facility. And my sponsor at the time was absolutely right. I left treatment, and more than just Ian, I was still fixated on returning to a life that I thought was okay. I couldn't see that aside from the relationship, everything else about the life that I had built in sobriety was wrong. There was so much that was wrong, and so much that I was still attached to that I thought I needed. I still considered all of the outward things that I valued as being part of my solution, and it was to prove completely the opposite. And yeah, I came out of that treatment facility and thought I could just slot back into the life that I'd had before. And it was a really, really, really upsetting shock to me to realize that I couldn't, because I didn't get that relationship back. And what happened was I picked up exactly like the sponsor I had at the time had said. I picked up. And then over the course of the next year and a half, my disease just ran wild. The textbook story of everything that you put before your recovery you will lose, that happened to me. And it just went down in one kind of blaze after another. I lost jobs. I lost friendships. I lost relationships. I lost my home. I was reduced to living back at my parents' house. And, that's not normal. It's not normal for a 40-year-old man to be having to move back in with his family because I couldn't look after myself. I was at the end of my road. Well, I wasn't. I moved back into my parents' house and then persisted in trying to use successfully for the next year. And I couldn't. And in that time, I grew more and more isolated and withdrew hugely from everything and everyone around me. I had got a job that I went to. I used that. I didn't have any solution. I didn't have any relationship with friends. And I certainly wasn't interested in this program. I would often say to my family that it didn't work. I didn't believe that this program worked. And I didn't. That wasn't just me fobbing it off. There was a part of me that believed at that point in time that the solution that I'd been exposed to in 2 treatment centers didn't work. But at the same time, it was a weird kind of dualism going on in my head. I still wanted all the benefits. I wanted all the promises without doing any of the work and without actually stopping using. Thank you. I would like to keep using a lot and whenever possible and with the least amount of consequences and all the benefits, please. That headspace stayed with me. That's what I believed was my right. And I couldn't see what was going on around me. I couldn't see the pain that my family were going through. And it didn't matter how many times both my parents would plead with me, and they did, to stop. I'd crossed that line where I couldn't and I wouldn't. And it got to the point where I was told by them categorically that if they caught me using substance again, I was out. I didn't have a home to come to. And I don't think I believed them. Or in my splendorous delusion and arrogance, I didn't think it would actually go that way, and I didn't think through the consequences. I was so wrapped up in self that I didn't think it would happen. And it did. It got to a place where that last day is very blurry for me, but I did reach out to help on that last day to somebody that was in the program back in Harare. Because I had got at that point to a place where I was breaking inside now. I wanted to die. I thought there was no solution. As I said, I didn't see this as a viable out. I didn't think that I could do it again. I didn't think that I had it in me or that to put the action in, really. And there were a couple of days before that actual bitter end where I honestly thought that dying would be easier. It would be better. I didn't want to feel like this anymore. And I didn't think there was going to ever be any reason that I wouldn't feel like this. And as it happened on that last day, and I started to see God work on that last day. I was in the middle of the morning, and I was at a gas station, and I was getting fuel, and it was like 9 or 10 in the morning, and I was already using, and pretty blasted. And somebody in the fellowship drove up next to me, and I actually reached out to them. And things started happening very quickly for me then. I went back to my parents' house, and they made good on their promise that I was no longer welcome. And so I left, and I didn't know what was going to happen. I really didn't. But something went off in my head, and I thought, I don't want to die. I don't want to die. The only kind of option, or the only place where I think that I might stand any chance of getting better, was the house on the hill. And so I was lucky enough to have a friend with me who flew down with me and brought me into treatment. And I came down with I think I had enough money that I hadn't blown off my own to pay for 1 month's treatment. And to be clear, I don't really know what I was expecting to happen. I think I was hoping that if I came for 28 days that I'd find something enough to be able to start putting my life back together again. But I didn't. I just didn't know what was going to happen. My family had said, goodbye, good luck, rock on, get on with your life, we want nothing to do with you anymore. And I arrived back in treatment with that. But something happened, and I'll never forget. I remember getting on my knees. That treatment center had taught me the important part about getting on your knees and starting the process of surrender. And that's what happened that time. I remember arriving and still in my absolute, in that terrible place of active, getting on my knees. And something started to change. And kind of what resonated with me in the reading yesterday was, in our sister fellowship, was that magic moment where I don't know why, and I don't know why. I don't have to know why. It became clear and it became easy, if that makes sense. The fight I felt it just go. I felt safe. I felt that I was somewhere where if I had any chance of any relationship with the family that had turned their back on me, and rightly so, then where I was going to be it. And the rest of that experience in treatment was just incredible. You know, for me, when the fight was over, everything that the treatment center was teaching me made sense. I could, I remember sitting in big books and listening and hearing the solution being taught, and it just made sense. There were people that were in my life the first time I was in that treatment center that started coming back. People that I wasn't friends with the first time but came back into treatment, and I started to see relationships start to repair. The relationship with my family was not one of them initially. But I was okay with that, and I was okay with that because what started to dawn on me was that I needed to be okay with that. I needed, for the first time in my life, to do something without expecting to be rescued. I needed to take responsibility for my life, and I needed to start doing this because I wanted it, and not because it would equate being let back into my family, not because of anything else, but because I wanted it. Because for the first time I started to come down to these meetings on a Sunday and see people doing their milestone shares, and I, for the first time, thought, I want that now. And I could start looking at the people that I was in treatment with who are now working at the treatment center and go, I want that. And I want this life. I don't know what it's going to look like. And for someone who has lived with fear all their life, that was the biggest change. Not knowing what my life was going to look like, but being okay with it was the change. And being okay with, if I did what I was told, that it would be okay. And what's happened over the last year has been nothing short of incredible for me. It's just been, I still am without words. I'm sitting here and my parents are here, and they are the people that wanted nothing to do with me just over a year ago, and rightly so. And there have been so many little miracles, huge miracles for me along my journey. One of which happened when I left the treatment center, and I was told that my family was still actually there in the background and had been supporting me while I was at that treatment center, and that they did want to risk, again, being part of my life. And I remember my sponsor telling me that my mother had said to him that she was preparing for my death. That's the place that my disease took me to, where it was easier for my family, who had educated themselves on this disease, to start preparing for my death, because living with me like that was too awful. For them, it would be easier if I did die, because then it would be over. And knowing, I don't know, it was words like that and understanding that at some point where it actually started to sink in what I had done and what I had put people through. And I wanted to be different. And as I said, I had no idea what different would look like. And for someone like me who's a control freak and who's fearful by nature, embarking on this last year has been nothing short of wonderful, because all of the relief and all of the peace that I thought I found in substance and shitty behavior, I've kind of had without that. I've been okay with not knowing what tomorrow was going to bring. I knew that I couldn't go back to my parents. I knew that I had to start a new life here, but I have been just, I think even the word blessed doesn't do it justice. My experience of being able to go into the halfway house was utterly amazing. That was something I was never prepared to do. The first time I was in treatment, the idea of going into a halfway house, the idea of not being in a relationship for a year, all of these things, me not having my nice stuff, my nice life, was not something I wanted. This time all I wanted was this. This time all I wanted was to maintain the relationships I'd started to find and rebuild. And I wanted my family. But I wanted my family healthy, and I wanted to be healthy. And I started to understand that really the only way that was going to happen was for me to stay the fuck away from them for as long as possible. And, my folks had been planning to move down to this part of the world, and when lockdown hit, their plans of being down here in May couldn't happen, and they were sitting waiting. And I think it was in like July or August, I said to my mom, I don't think you're going to come until I've reached my year. I think that's God's plan. I don't think you're going to come. Or you're going to come until then. On the date of my 1 year, my mom got her visa. And they're here. And for me, like I say, that distance from my family and that time for us to heal as a family has been, for me, incredible. I've been able to, with the support of everybody here, start a new life. And it's one that I love so much. And this fellowship and my recovery now means to me what I had always heard other people share it to mean. And I hope that doesn't change. And I don't really know what else to say. I'm so grateful to be here. I'm so grateful for all of you. I'm so grateful for my family. And thank you. Thank you for letting me share.